Hello everyone, welcome back to my workshop. I have treated myself to a new toy. It's the Freewing Phantom. And this comes nowadays with a speed controller capable of doing reverse thrust, which is very useful on the short tarmac runway where I fly. But there's a couple of issues about this which make it worth doing a Jeti video. The first one is that if you follow Freewing's instructions, reverse thrust simply doesn't work. It always stays in normal forward thrust. There's an error in Freewing's speed controller, but we'll look at how to program your Jeti, or in fact, to be honest, any transmitter, to overcome the error in Freewing's speed controller. And the second thing is a nice bit of programming. Freewing's idea is that you just put reverse thrust on, say, a switch to go into reverse thrust and then open up the throttle. But that's not how I operate the brakes on my jet models. So I want to be able to do it the same way I work the brakes on my jets, because that's where my brain is going to go to when I'm in a hurry to stop on a short runway. And that is to use the side slider here. So that would be brake off, brakes fully on. So what I want to do is program this to put the speed controller into reverse thrust, and then when it does that, take over the throttle so that pushing it further down increases power, but it's disabled the stick. And of course we need some safety mechanisms built into that so that we can't put it into reverse while the throttle's open. And similarly, once we've got that on, if we nudge the throttle, it doesn't simply take it out of reverse into forward mode. It leaves it in reverse until we actually take the brake off. So we'll look at the programming of how to do that as well. Okay, let's get into our programming. Right, the first thing we need to do is look at a reversing function. The speed controller has two sets of leads from it. One is your normal throttle lead, and the other one, with just one signal wire for it, is for the reversing. So it needs a function and a channel to do that. So if we go in there, we have a look at my functions assignment. You can see I have a reverse function, and I've assigned it to logic switch 2. We'll see why as we get to it. But in Freewing's case, you would just assign it to a simple switch. And I've also got a virtual brake function, which is assigned to the side slider, and we'll come on to that in a moment. Servo assignment, we've got a channel for the reverse function. There isn't one for the brake, that's why I called it brake virtual. It's just there for mixing purposes, not for an actual channel. Now, the problem is that if you operate the switch to put the speed controller into reverse, it doesn't go into reverse, it stays in forward. And the problem is that Freewing have designed it so that the reverse doesn't occupy the entire half of travel. If you imagine minus 100 to 0 would be forward and 0 to plus 100 would be reverse, what seems to happen is that from 0 to plus 70 or 80 perhaps is reverse, and then the remaining from plus 80 to plus 100 is forward again. So of course when you switch from minus 100 to plus 100, it just goes from forward to forward, and you start to think the thing's faulty. In a sense it is. It's a bit of a bad design by Freewing. So we can easily overcome that by reducing the servo travel. So if you come to servo setup, and turn your reverse down to, say, 50% both directions. It really only needs it in the correct direction, but turn it down to both. It's easier than trying to work out which way is the correct direction. Turn it down 50%, and then the signal will go from forward to reverse and be recognized by the Freewing speed controller, and lo and behold, it works. So that's the first thing to do. Turn the servo down to something like 50% either way. Unless you find yours is working, there might be a slight variability. I had a look around the web and some people are having the problem and some people are not having the issue. So if yours works, fine. Still, it might be worth doing this anyway, just in case yours is on the cusp of not going into reverse. You don't want to land sometime, put it into reverse and find it's not working because of slight jitter in the servo frame. And then we come to programming the side slider as a brake. And the first thing we want to do is use the side slider to put the reverse onto the speed controller. And then the second thing we'll do is make it take over the throttle function. So we start that by going to logic switches. In here, and we'll have a look at this. So this is the first logic switch, and I have it as control 1 is P4, that's my throttle stick, and it's set up like this. So switch on is at minus 95%. In other words, I've got to have the throttle basically back on the last little click of the mechanism, and if it's forward of that, the switch is going to go off. Notice that I've pressed the rev button to get it to be on when the throttle is back. Otherwise it defaults to throttle being the switch being on when the throttle's forward. Okay, and control 2 is the P6 slider, and what I've done is set that to come on basically at the detente in the middle. I've got 3% just so that it comes on just as we touch the detente in the middle. Otherwise it can be a bit iffy whether it comes on when you get there or just afterwards. And again, I've pressed the rev button because as I push the slider away from me, you can see it goes into negative territory. That's where I want it to switch on this switch. So basically the throttle stick has to be all the way back, and I've got to move the slider to its center position, then the switch will come on. And the reason I've chosen such a large band here where it won't switch on is just in case I accidentally knock it when I'm flying or move it a little bit. I've got to get it all the way to that center detente before it will go into reverse. So just in case I'm pulling out of a loop or coming down in a dive and I've managed to get the throttle all the way back to off, and then I managed to nudge the brake control as well, I've got a lot of latitude there, it still won't go into reverse. Okay. And then it's an AND condition, so that if the throttle's open, I can do what I like with the P6, it's not going to go into reverse. Throttle to the off position, I can move P6 until it reaches the detente, and on it comes. So that is going to be initially the switch. But what would happen if I've landed, I've got the throttle all the way back, and I've pushed the brake lever on and I'm in the brake. I'll show you a little bit back in here. And whilst I'm running in reverse, trying to come to a stop, I managed to nudge the throttle open. Well, that's what would happen. Even just, a click forward on the throttle and it's come out of reverse and it's going to go back into forward thrust, which is not what I want when I'm trying to apply the brakes. So that's why I've gone for logic switch 2 here, which is an A on, B off switch. So it uses the logic switch we've just made as control A, or control 1, line A. And as you can see, if I've got the throttle stick back and I move the slider forward, there, logic switch comes on and the output here goes on. But it won't come off by me opening the throttle stick. There, I'll open the throttle stick. You can see logic switch 1's gone off, back on when I've come to idle. The brake or reverse thrust stays on, and it won't come off until I've brought the P6 slider about halfway back. There it goes. So have a look at that. I've set it to 77%. You can put it somewhere in there. And it just means that once we've got the brake working, we're in reverse thrust. It won't come out of reverse thrust until I've brought the P6 control most of the way back. So if I accidentally nudge the throttle open, it's not going to be a problem. Now, what we do then is take that logic switch 2, and as we saw earlier on, I can see the view in the camera appears to be almost vibrating. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what's causing that. It seems to be hunting in and out a little bit. If we look at the model, functions assignment, there we are, reverse has that logic switch 2 to switch it on and off. Okay, so that will at least deal with that. So now we've got the side slider controls whether we're in reverse thrust or not. Next, we want to look at actually controlling the throttle. Now remember, we have the brake virtual. Well, this is going to be effectively taking over control of the throttle. And we'll do that through mixers. So free mixes. The first one is throttle to throttle at -100%. Now the purpose of mixing a function to itself, as we're doing here, throttle to throttle, at -100%, is that it cancels out the effect of that function, and it will lock its output at 0%, which is mid-throttle in this case, which of course is not what we want, but the next mixer will overcome that and give us control through P6. So what it does, in effect, is mean that whatever you do with the throttle stick is not going to have any effect on the throttling whilst we're in reverse. And incidentally, come down here, I've switched off the throttle asymmetric mix, and that just helps this perform properly. Okay, so that one negates the action of the throttle stick. The next mixer, come down a line, gives the P6 control of the throttle. So here now we're mixing the brake virtual to the throttle. The master value is 100%. Switch again is logic switch 2, but very importantly here is the curve. Now if I operate the P6 lever, you watch the cursor move, comes along here, switches on, it drops into the curve now. So now P6 is at the midpoint, and we can create a control of the throttle. And I've done it by changing it to a 3-point, moving the center point down to 0, so that although the first mixer we looked at has locked the output at mid-throttle, this one now adds to that. So the output's at 0 from the first mixer, add in -100% from this mixer, and the output is -100%. And you can see with point 3, I've brought it down from +100 to about +50%. And the reason for that is simply you can play around with it. If you don't want to go to full power in reverse thrust, but just limit the power in reverse thrust, you can do that. You could bring it down to -50, -10, +20, whatever you like, as a maximum braking effect. And that takes care of that. Let's have a look at the effect on the throttle channel. We'll go into servo mixer. So the throttle stick at the moment has control of channel 1. You ignore channel 8, that's the afterburner controller. So channel 1 is moving with the throttle stick. I'll leave the throttle stick at some off value there, and I will operate P6, which is channel 7 is the reversing on and off, and channel 1 is the throttle. So if I operate P6 now, nothing should happen to channel 7 or channel 1. There we go. I'm moving it back and forwards, and nothing happens because the throttle is not back at the off position. If I move the throttle all the way back to the off position, and now I operate P6, when the slider gets to the mid position, channel 7 should jump to plus 50%, and the throttle would still be at minus 100. So we get there. There it is. It's now in the reverse mode, and with a slider I can now start to move through the second half of its travel, and you see the throttle coming up, and it gets up to 50% positive value. And I can move it back, I can reduce the power, and I can get it all the way back to no throttle at all. We're still in reverse mode, so I can still add more brake if I want. If I open the throttle stick, channel 7 will stay in reverse mode. See that? I have to bring the slider, i.e. the brake or reverse, back most of its way, and then channel 7 will jump back out of reverse into forward mode, and now the throttle stick works instead of reversing. When I'm doing something that could have a big effect on flying the model, I like to have a voice warning. So in this case, what I've done is into Advanced Properties, Sounds on Event, and I've come down here and I've put a warning voice message on P6 slider, so that as I start to open the slider even just a little bit, it'll tell me that the brakes are on.
Brake on. Brake on. Brake on.
Yes, I know it's reverse thrust, but as far as I'm concerned, what we're doing is braking. And I have it on repeat, so that if I've got the slider open a bit,
brake on. Brake on.
It'll perhaps a little bit annoying when you're putting the brakes on the ground, because you know you've put the brakes on, that's what you want. But the purpose of this is to warn me in the air if I've managed to nudge the slider open a little bit. Remember, it won't put the thing into reverse until I've got the slider halfway, but it'd be nice to know if I've started nudging it open at some point. And that's it. That takes care of it all for you.